Labour's Tony Burke says the proposed English language test is ludicrous and that a large number of Australians will never reach that level of English required. Well, joining me to discuss this in more detail is citizenship law expert Professor Kim Rubenstein from the ANU. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Could you just start off by explaining to us what is actually involved in the current citizenship tests?
Well, I think that's a really good question because a lot of the discussion at the moment seems to misunderstand what is currently required in order to become an Australian citizen, and even to slightly correct your introduction in relation to residence. Because at the moment, in order to become a citizen, you actually need to have resided for 4 years in Australia and 1 year as a permanent resident. So the residence requirements at the moment are in fact 4 years. It's just the component that is required to be a permanent resident. And when that 4 years was introduced back in 2007, it was about making sure that we had time to veto and to assess people's integration into the community. So our citizenship test already is cognizant and concerned with those issues, and is part of the reason why this proposal should have been resisted as it has been. But in relation to English...
Can I just stop you there before we actually go into the details of the test itself?
Yes.
You mentioned that a migrant would have to wait 4 years before applying for citizenship. So is the government then proposing an extra 4 years? Is that it?
Effectively, they're requiring
so
an extra...
8 years in total?
Well, if they're saying 4 years as a permanent resident, I guess theoretically that's an additional 3 years on top of the existing 1 year as a permanent resident. So it's an extra 3 years on top of the current 4 years. So that's right, it's a very extensive period of time in relation to permanent residence if it's in addition to the current requirements of 4 years of residence. And arguably the 4 years of residence at the moment does the job that they're seeking to say that this supposed new proposal would improve. But
I suppose if you look at it from the government's point of view, this would give the migrant enough time to be able to integrate into the community, to prove the migrant's loyalty, ties to the community in Australia.
That becomes a question of how long we need to assess that, and whether the further time makes effectively two classes of members of the community. And also there is a concern that the longer that you leave it and the more that a person becomes integrated, the more they are effectively part of the community, and so you're creating two classes of members, those who have effectively proved their capacity in a much higher threshold than currently is the place, and one that is currently a very significant period of time. 4 years is a long time to be assessed in relation to your membership and integration of the community.
And within that, let's just say 7 years or so, I suppose the migrant would be able to prove that they would be a economically contributing citizen to the country.
Yeah, so I guess then it becomes a question about your characterisation of what it means to become a citizen, and whether it's only about proving to the rest of the community about certain thresholds, or whether it is also about social integration and cohesion. And one of the aspects of Australian society today, in a strong multicultural society, is about encouraging people to become full members of the community, to be fully connected. And so the longer you put that off, the less included you are making those individuals in the community. So the question is, what is the right balance of time between that notion of encouragement and participation and one of exclusion and suspect nature of those coming into the country?
On the other hand, though, it may actually mean that the migrant would have to prove their dedication to the country, to wait 7 years or so.
There are those aspects to it, and it's a question of finding the right balance, isn't it?
Well, let's talk about the current test in its current form now.
Sure, yes.
What does it actually require? What's in the test?
So to understand the current test, it's useful to also give a sense of the earlier test when it was first introduced. And in fact, the aspect of English language to be part of the test has been really part of the framework for citizenship since 1949, when it first was introduced. And in essence, when it was first introduced, was requiring an adequate knowledge of English, and then from 1984 it became a basic knowledge of English. And the way that is currently tested is through the citizenship test itself, which has to be done in English, which effectively requires the person to have in practice more than a basic knowledge of English in order to be able to answer the questions in the test. Now, the test itself, which is what you're asking about, is really essentially assessing whether a person understands the pledge that they're taking when they become a citizen. And so in that respect, the current test is really about understanding what it means to become an Australian citizen.
By raising the English proficiency level, could the government be, in a way, trying to attract migrants with a higher level of skill to Australia?
So your question is actually a really interesting one in distinguishing between the migration policy and attraction of migrants and then people who have come to Australia in that policy, and then the level of English required to become a full member. So I think your question is really about that migration policy aspect, which is about encouraging people who are able to integrate into society. And then that is, I guess, your first entry point. And then the second point, which is what citizenship is about that notion of social inclusion and commitment to Australia, and what level is necessary for that as a further extension for migrants, a further extension of their absorption into the community. So yes, so there are different levels of English that, of course, enable people to become participants in our society.
Kim Rubenstein, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.